a therapist might feel like they've got to answer this question because it has a question mark at the end of it, right? And when there's a question mark at the end of a sentence, then we try to answer the question that's being asked. But you're so right, Martha. I am absolutely using what's in front of me to try to surface many things that there's an implication that there's more here. I don't know what that implication is pointing to, but I'm sure interested in finding out.
Welcome back, friends. I can't promise that we'll always answer questions from listeners, but I think we're going to answer a couple this time because it was just so exciting to be talking about situations where somebody asks us something and we're like, ooh, I don't know. That's a hard one. And both of us enjoyed it so much, so we're here for it. Before we jump in, though, I realized there might be just the tiniest bit more context that would be helpful. Skye, would you be willing to just say a little bit? Do you see individuals? Do you see couples? So when we're talking about clients, we're sort of talking about, sometimes we're talking about an individual client, sometimes we're talking about couple clients, relational clients, polycules, what have you.
Yep.
So what's your jam?
Okay, so my jam happens to be humans. So that's good news. And I do see people on an individual level. I see dyadic relationships, and I also have some polycules that I get the privilege of helping to take care of. So do a little bit of it all when it comes to the client configurations. And even when I'm working with a dyad, sometimes there will be those one-offs that, like, okay, we're getting into something. Let's pull off from the dyadic work and just look at the subject one-to-one. And then we come back, and that might happen with both members of the dyad in a situation where there's a dyadic relationship. And I might do the same thing with a polycule, where I do at least one session to just try to get as much content as I can. But I definitely see all sorts of clients. And hey, if you're listening and this appeals to you, I probably would be interested in hearing from you.
Awesome. So sometimes you do individual sessions as part of your relational work, and you see individuals and you also see relationships.
I do.
So would you say that most of the things that we've been talking about so far are applicable to either kind of client? Because I often get questions about, but how would that look in an individual session? But how would that look in a couple session? But how would I do that? And blah, 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 blah.
I'm nodding yes. Our friends cannot see us, but I am actually vigorously nodding because I really don't see these interventions as directed toward one type of client configuration. I think you can use this with an individual or a couple or a polycule. So I wouldn't limit any of this to just one particular thing. What about you?
I completely agree. Absolutely. This isn't one of the questions that we're going to answer today, but I wanted to cover it because it's a question that I get all the time. I'll try to remember to sort of say, it looks a little different with an individual. It looks a little different with a relationship. But some of the questions we're going to answer probably do look different with an individual than a relationship. So I just wanted to cue this up. I specialize in difficult couple situations, complex relationships, open relationships of any structure, consensual non-monogamies. And I also really love doing individual relational work. So individual clients where the content is around relationship things. And the thing just about my practice, I have almost never got an opening. So I'm just saying this for context about kind of where my expertise is. So I think both of us are talking about every kind of relational work I might do and individual.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to pitch you the first question, okay?
Okay, but before you do, just in case people have not heard individual relational work, let's have you talk about what that means for you.
Yeah. First of all, I just have to say it's like my favorite. It's my favorite thing.
It is pretty juicy.
I love it. So this is where I have an individual client and they're trying to sort out a relationship issue. I want to leave or I want to stay, or I don't know what to do about this, or we have my partner is so annoying in this way or the other way, or my boss or my mom or my sister or what, anybody. I've got a dispute with my friend where a lot of what we're talking about has to do with interpersonal interactions. I love finding ways to work with that individual in ways that create meaningful change for them in their relational context when they get back to it, even though I don't have everybody in the room with me for the therapy. I've figured out ways to do it, and it's just the funnest thing ever for me. So that's what I mean.
Pretty powerful stuff from what I'm hearing. And I agree. I love that too. It's mind boggling how when somebody really gets engaged in their relationship work, whether it's solo or in a dyad or a polycule, that you can make changes on the ground level where you are. And I think people end up being pretty shocked at how a dynamic can shift as a result of a perspective change or as a result of some intervention. So I definitely didn't want to leave that out because I think that's pretty important for our listeners to have some sense that, hey, we can do relationship work that doesn't look like somebody sitting through an hour of therapy and complaining about their partner the whole time, because somehow I don't think that's actually what you're talking about.
Never.
Well, that was not confusing.
Yeah.
So,
Never, ever.
yeah. Okay. I'm ready for you to pitch. What you got?
Okay.
What we got?
Okay. It's a nice one. Okay. So, what is the minimum amount of times I can do it in a month and get away with it? When a client says that, this therapist felt stumped. So, what you got?
Well, I think the therapist was stumped for a really great reason. So I'm just going to start off with this. The therapist really would never know how many times you can do it, I'm putting that in quotes, a month and get away with it. So I really hear that as a loaded question. And I want to let therapist who is asking that question, and maybe there's more than one of you out there who's asking, how do I address that with a client? We're not actually going to start by picking apart a number of times that it's okay for somebody to have sex and be able to get away with it.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah, we're not. Sorry. I'm not going to say blank. I'm not even going to offer a number online or on air because I don't want anybody hearing that and saying, oh, Skye said this number and misquoting. So I'm going to stay far, far away from that. And my recommendation is that you do too as the clinician. So let's get into this a little bit.
Well, yeah, I'm going to jump in before you get in because what you just said is huge. So your client could literally ask you a direct question and you could decide to respond in a surprising to them way.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to go further and say,
amazing.
I could tell them in my way, I'm not going to answer that question. Like, I might say that, I might not.
Okay, wait a minute. So you are saying that your client could ask you literally a direct question and you could decide to surprise them by not answering their question or redirecting in some way. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And so I love the fact that you said decide because it is a decision for me. And I think getting to the place where I feel comfortable talking about sex and sexuality did mean kind of earlier on making the decision that I was not going to be in the business of making a decision about what people should and should not be doing sexually. Yes, it's true.
Dang, there it goes again. So you do not make decisions. I'm going to just experiment with another word in there for judgments.
Both are true.
About what your clients do or don't do sexually.
You actually heard that properly the first and the second time.
Wow.
So being a person who works with people around intimacy and sex, it is not the same thing I do not conflate that with making decisions and or judgments. And there are probably a few other words that we could throw in there that I don't do. So yes, I have given myself the permission and the authority that I can decide that if I am being asked a direct question, that I can go in a direction different than what that client may be wanting from me. And I can trust the process that we can still get somewhere meaningful, even without me saying, you can get away with doing it blank times a month. I am going to tap dance away from a number as many times as possible because I feel so strongly about not inserting anything out into the zeitgeist that might look like instructional about how frequently people need to engage sexually. So, yeah, let me take just a big breath around that because there's actually more that I want to say about this. So, if you're the therapist and someone has this, I'm going to use the word distress. They've got this distress, and the distress is showing up in this particular way. I need to figure out how many times I can do it and get away with it. There's like 50,000, maybe 51,000 questions that are relevant with that. So I might start by just kind of leaning in and what's the Skye way? I'm going to reflect back. I'm going to say, okay, I think I'm hearing you say, and it'll be as close to like mirroring their language as possible. And then usually I've done a decent job. And then I might say, okay, I'd like to tell you what I'm hearing when you say that. So then I will mirror the language, but not quite as closely. And then I'll say, what did I miss? Correct me, challenge me. I want to make sure we're on the same page. And then I could go in a couple of different directions, but I'd probably start with asking, what do they mean about how many times they have to do it? And what is the doing it? Maybe someone might think, well, isn't it obvious? I think another part of being a therapist and being a sex therapist is there is no obvious. And the minute we start to assume that there is an obvious, makes it really easy for us to miss the mark. So I'm going to volley back to you and just ask you before we move forward, what do you think about that part about isn't it obvious and me saying, well, what is the doing it that you're talking about?
We have so many euphemisms that we use to describe sex.
Uh-huh.
And I think an important part of what we do is expand the idea of what sex could be.
Exactly.
Way beyond PIV, penis and vagina contact. So if we're going to do that, if we're going to actually debunk the idea that that's what sex means and expand the definition to involve an entire menu of possibility, which I think is a really important therapeutic intervention, then we're going to have to do it strategically with a lot of small, light touches. And this that you're describing strikes me as being one of those light touches to just say, what do you mean by it?
Uh-huh.
That's a way of saying, you could mean any number of things by it, so tell me what it is. So already you've expanded the field of possibility.
Yeah. Okay. So we are exactly on the same page with this. So it sounds like you kind of would do something similar related to breaking down these euphemisms.
Always break down a euphemism.
Okay. So I'll keep going. So getting to understand, okay, what is the doing it and what does that mean? And then what are you experiencing when you do whatever this it is? So fill in the blank with what the it is and learning, okay, what is that like for you? What appeals? What doesn't appeal? And how did that get framed for you? So at this point, I might kind of drop back into kind of some history stuff that typically we may have brushed up against at some point earlier in the therapy sessions. But I want some understanding of how did this get configured for you? Like this whole concept, even that getting away with it. What does that mean? And where did you come up with the idea that there's a requirement? And what do you believe will happen if you don't meet that requirement? Which, boy, talk about some relationship work. So there's a lot there already. And we're just in our first, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes of the session of really just trying to understand the mechanics of the question.
Before you go further, I want to really highlight that essentially what you're doing here is you're surfacing that the question they're asking you is not really the question that they have.
Yes.
So you're trying to understand what is the real thing going on underneath this, because this question, what's the minimum amount of times I can do it in a month and get away with it, has so many loopholes.
It does.
It's full of loopholes, and every single one of those is like a pink flag saying assumption here, assumption here, assumption here, belief system here, assumption there, judgment there.
Right.
Right.
All these arrows pointing to like error message, error message, error message.
Exactly.
And I don't want to say that because, for the client, they're asking this question so they possibly don't even see all of the error messages that are showing up in this particular question. So I really can understand how a therapist might feel like they've got to answer this question because it has a question mark at the end of it, right? And when there's a question mark at the end of a sentence, then we try to answer the question that's being asked. But you're so right, Martha. I am absolutely using what's in front of me to try to surface many things that there's an implication that there's more here. I don't know what that implication is pointing to, but I'm sure interested in finding out.
And it's distress. So smart. And I think that's how this gets to be a hard question. When somebody asks you a question that has 15 error messages attached to it, that's just confusing.
Right.
So a therapist, and then let's imagine that it's a therapist who maybe hasn't talked about sex a lot in their career and they don't feel on solid ground. So they're already wobbly. And then this comes with all of its confusion. I think it's really, really expectable that a therapist would be confused. It's confusing. And you can also kind of see the pitfall.
Right.
Because there is not an answer to that question. Even if you wanted to cough up a number, there's not an answer to that question. And if you got sort of sucked into trying to make there be an answer, you'd almost have to say, turn to your partner and ask.
Right.
But your partner doesn't get to say how often you have sex either. So
true.
The pitfalls are everywhere. And I think it's so understandable that a therapist would just freeze.
And even, thinking about this particular question and feeling like I've heard this one before, to be perfectly honest. This is not something that I haven't seen in my own therapy space, this mentality and all the things that are the underpinnings, if you will, behind a question like this. I'll be honest, I have not always nailed it. I have not always given the response that I would give today. And maybe tomorrow I won't nail it as well. But if they come back, if they come back for the next session, we can circle back to the conversation. I can just say, I was thinking about that a little bit more. Can we revisit and go from there? So, yeah.
That's the learning curve. Yeah. You don't get confident and really effective at anything without practice. Why would you think that you could?
And sometimes without some failure.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So go a little further with this imaginary client.
Okay. So we've gotten to the point where we think we have some idea of what they mean and doing it, and we're getting some information about how this concept got conceptualized in their own thinking. And I want to also know, I may have already said this, what do they think is going to happen if they don't meet that amount of times? And is this internalized pressure? So now I'm getting into some relationship questions. Is this internalized pressure? Is this externalized pressure? Or is this both?
What do you mean by externalized pressure?
Yeah, so pressure that maybe a partner is applying by specifically saying, if you were a good partner, you would provide sex this many times, and they're trying to get confirmation. Is that right? Am I being unreasonable, or is my partner being unreasonable? Which, spoiler alert, these are not great questions. Am I being unreasonable? Is my partner being unreasonable? That's also bait that I would not take. But understanding, okay, what are the underpinnings that are happening under the relationship? And I might just ask, is this something you and your partner are talking about? Has this been broached between the two of you? Will you let me in to some of those conversations? And boy, they start singing like, oh, yeah, this happened. There was this disagreement. And this person said that unless it's this many times, or if I can't do at least this, then I should be doing at least that. And that's when you get all of this information that likely, well, you know what? I'm going to say not likely. How about 50-50 that you may not have gotten without taking the time to really look and see what's happening in the relationship dynamic. Now, here's another thing that I see happening. Sometimes a client will become frustrated with me. Remember back to the beginning, and you said, you mean you can decide? Sometimes I can feel the client getting frustrated. And like I said, I see that as suffering. I see that as distress, that something hard is going on. And they just are to the point where they want the fucking answer so that they can do that thing so that the relationship will be better. And I don't have to feel bad anymore. This person doesn't have to feel bad anymore. And I bet both of us have a whole lot of opinions about taking that route to try to figure out your intimate relationships, right? But that is certainly not a route that we want to go down. So as you're surfacing this information about what's happening in the relationship from the external perspective and what's happening in the relationship internally, we're wanting to be present, and we want to give them permission over and over again, checking in. And what's this like for you? And where did you learn that? And what's this like for you? And where do you think you learned that? So they're having an awareness that they came to their sexuality by proxy of a lot of content that they didn't get to opt in or out of. One of the things I say often in the therapy space is like, oh, we're like a computer that was left laying out and anybody could come and put a program or an input in, because you hear things that you didn't necessarily ask to hear when you're out and about in the world. You see things that you didn't necessarily ask to see, just at the grocery store, how someone is interacting with a significant other. And so getting someone to talk about what they have learned, what they've taken in, and how much that aligns or doesn't align is an important part of this process for me, because this idea that I need to get away with it, or they're going to leave or stay or what have you, and the minimum amount, I want to know, is that an agentic ideology? Is that something that you would choose if you could go into the supermarket of ideas around sex and sexuality? Is that something you would choose? And if not, then we could talk about it. Okay, I've said a lot. Tell me where I need to come back in and clarify or clean things up.
Well, a cool thing about where you're going with this, I think, is that you're trying to surface that our beliefs about ourselves and probably also about sex are constructed somehow out of our experiences. And so you're introducing an idea that maybe there's another way to think about just about anything.
Yeah.
And I can really see that adopting that perspective would be an important first step with somebody who's really kind of hyper-focused on, I need to check this box and it's an emergency. So answer my question and help.
And back to that, this idea that the client might be frustrated with you, that they might say, can you just give me an answer? My partner's on my back, or I feel awful. I feel like I'm being a bad partner. Can you just give me the answer? And I've had moments like that, not just about this, but about many things that people just want the answer. And that can be a really sticky moment, because I can feel myself taking on their energy of like, rescue me, give me the answer, get me out of this sticky wicket. And the temptation in my own system of, okay, I want to get you out of the, I'm sorry, I want to be able to help. But ultimately, I know that it isn't helpful. So, my own differentiation work, my own individuation work, where I can be separate from the client and still have that therapeutic join. And sometimes it just comes down to me acknowledging, I know that you're looking for an answer. And what's it like that I'm not giving you one? And so, again, just getting really honest and dropping into that moment and letting them know it's not lost on me that the level of distress is causing you to push for this thing. Can you ride with me a little bit? Because I think if we go on this ride together and we really break this question, concern down, you might leave with some work that you get to feel really proud of. And so most times people are willing to go on that ride. Doesn't mean that at the end of the session, they don't say something like, why didn't you just give me the number? Yeah. But usually that's said with a little bit of sense of pride around the work that they've done and feeling like I'm in this. I'm grappling with this material. And in a question like this, the suffering and the frustration, the distress, I really do believe it really is my experience in the therapy space that people want to know themselves in such a way that they can surface answers for themselves, even when they're pushing at me, wanting something to kind of make this a lot easier. So that's my experience.
I love it. One of the things that I think may come in this session as a result of you working skillfully in this way with it is this seems to me to be a case that does have some pressure for sex.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, whether you're working with an individual who's telling you that they feel pressure for sex from their partner now, or whether you're working with a couple and you're seeing the pressuring dynamic actually in your therapy room, as well as hearing some story around it, I think that pressure for sex is a feature of this. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I've had to give some thought to how I wanted to show up with naming the, pressure for sex in this space because I'm really not interested in shaming. I mean, none of us are. I'm not interested in shaming anyone. And so when.
Wait. Ooh, that was unexpectedly juicy.
Okay, let's go backwards.
Not interested in shaming anyone. I want to unpack that. So it would be very easy to shame the person who wants less sex into thinking that there's an amount of sex that's normal or reasonable.
Yes.
And it would also be very easy to shame the person who wants more sex and has a lot of distress about it because often pressuring for sex, it's not a pretty look.
No.
Nobody wants to show up like that. And it looks often icky when you see it in the therapy room. It's often hard for a therapist to love that client. And yet, if you're in a monogamous relationship and you are the higher desire partner and your partner is able to say no to some degree or another, and you are not able to move that needle, just put yourself in that spot for a second. I would invite listeners, because I think this is a big pitfall for therapists.
I do too.
To just forget to kind of really empathize with how trapped that feels and how unheard and unseen, and then how the distress turns up the heat on it until you have often some pretty bad behavior. So how do you just conceptualize this?
So for the pressure for sex piece, I really like to think about just being honest about what pressure for sex does. And I try to neutralize that language. Like, it's not when you do this, then your partner does that, or when your partner does that, then this. So I try to take it away from what either person is doing and just talk about the results of pressure and then bring it to sex, or I may start off with sex, but these are the outcomes, and this is what I've seen in my career. This is what the research says about pressure for sex, so that we can try to neutralize, try to bring down the temperature, because sometimes I can feel the one partner that is not the high desire partner wanting somebody else to tell the high desire partner. Like, they're just waiting for somebody to say, you want it too much, right? And then I can also sometimes feel the higher desire partner wanting somebody to tell the lower desire partner that they don't want to have sex or engage in some type of sexual encounter enough. So trying to neutralize that language so that it's not pointed in any one direction, but just talking about the impacts of pressure. And oftentimes, I think you alluded to this.
Wait. What are the impacts of pressure?
So think about anything in life, not just sex, but when we are applying pressure, we really are reducing someone's ability to locate their own interest in doing that thing. So maybe there was some access that was already there, but the pressure element took that access away. And sometimes the person knows how to get that back, and sometimes they don't. And that's a whole other episode talking about how to find that for yourself. And then also, if we go into just the arousal and the desire cycles and having the brakes put on that arousal and desire and what speeds up, what the gas pedal looks like for an individual. So when I'm thinking about the outcome of pressure for sex, I'm always thinking that it's the gas pedal. Like all those arousal and desire features are going to begin to slow down and possibly come to a complete stop.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. What's your experience with that?
I often say money back guarantee, which I do not give easily. Pressure kills desire.
Oh,
So-
that's very succinct and clear language. Nobody's confused. Yeah. Pressure kills desire.
Pressure kills desire. And it's also impossible to really access a wholehearted yes unless you're quite confident that nothing negative is going to happen with a no. So somebody who has difficulty with no, or there are consequences or perceived consequences attached to no, probably needs to practice no a whole bunch until they feel safe with no.
Right.
Before the yes is going to actually bloom.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. The yes, the blooming yes. And isn't that something that we all would like to be able to offer? So we've got a therapist who is hearing a client ask, what's the minimum amount of times I can do it a month and get away with it? And we've gone all sorts of directions with this, trying to find out what's really at play. And we landed on, is there pressure for sex involved in the person who's asking this question? And we're both basically agreeing wholeheartedly that, yeah, this is probably a situation where there's pressure for sex. And so what do we do with that?
Which might be internalized, or it might be coming from the partner, or more likely a combo.
Yep, or more likely a combo. And so talking about the impact of pressure for sex, you've got a little to say about that. I've got a little bit to say about that. And probably I would let it rest from there. I really am learning, and I say am learning, not to do too much in one session. That things have to be digestible for the client. And when I start running with a lot of intellectualism and a lot of teaching, then I kind of miss some things. So asking, what do you think about that? What do you think about this concept that introducing? Does that ring true for you? Push back. And so even the high desire partner will sometimes say, yeah, I know, or I've seen this. And we'll see something from that person that maybe the partner hasn't seen before. That person will recognize and say out loud that they do have an awareness of that. And sometimes, that's a reparative moment that we just get for free, something we didn't really expect, but it lands and they're engaging with that content in a way that is softening something for the moment.
Absolutely. One other piece I think it'd be important to touch before we leave this question is the piece of, so where does that leave the higher desire partner? So if they're not going to pressure for sex and they're going to be very explicit that they want their partner to say no when their partner means no, and they're able to say, please, please, please do not engage in any kind of sexual activity that you don't want to. This is what I want for both of us. I want this to be clear. Then I'm sure that higher desire partner is going to have a part that's like, yeah, where does that fucking leave me?
Remember you talked about that therapeutic join earlier in that empathy and compassion that you asked the listeners, like, hey, friends, really think about if we're talking about a monogamous relationship here and this partner who has the higher desire is feeling like I'm not getting my quote needs met. So, an invitation to first have that compassion, second, have that compassion, third, have that compassion so that the higher desire partner has a sense of understanding that, okay, this is neutral ground. I'm not the bad human here for wanting this. And then asking them to get creative, coming back to their own sense of individuation, their own sense of differentiation. What are the reasons that this is valuable enough for you to maybe not get some or all of the things that you would want? And so maybe you're not getting the amount of sexual encounters that you want right now, but maybe you're having a relationship with yourself in a way that is different. And that's bleeding over into your relationship with your partner in a way that's different than what you've had. And that might have a value. I don't know what in particular would have a value, but I really want that client to come up with their own reasons for why this is a meaningful experiment to run, and then how to talk about with each other, this is what this is like for me right now, and building differentiation on both ends so that maybe we get to the point where the high desire partner can say, I'm really missing this in our relationship, and I stand behind the agreements that we made. And isn't that really lovely to be able to do both of those things at the same time? And for the partner with the lower desire to be able to hold themselves and be differentiated in that way that they can hear that, oh, this is a different conversation. This is not the, I miss this and what are you going to do about it? This is, I miss this and I want to stick by what we said we were going to do.
Mhm, mhm. I'm curious what you think about this idea. I'm imagining myself also at some point hoping that we could get to the lower desire partner being able to say, how can I support your eroticism without having sex when I don't want to? So in those moments when that happens, what's important to you is still important to me. And even though I'm not able to do what you want me to do in that moment, or I'm choosing not to, or the two of us together have a project of experimenting around this where I say no if I don't have a pretty clear willingness or yes, how do I support you in being an erotic being with sexual desire?
This is gold. This is gold, what I'm hearing you say. And it's so relational that I can be differentiated. I can want something separate and apart from what you want. And I want to hear from you how I can partner with you so that it is a win for me and I don't feel like I'm violating something that I said I wanted for myself. So I just think this is gold. And I'd love to hear you say just a couple more bits about that.
I think that's about it. I mean, the main thing is just not to forget that, we can't just do an erotic act. We can't just be like, well, you're just not going to have any sexual interest now. I am pretty sure that person's going to still have sexual interest, still want it, right? And feel disappointed. And what we don't want is for disappointment and grief over the way things are right now to turn into resentment and hostility or a trapped feeling that really increases the distress level. And one thing that decreases the distress level a lot is having your partner say, I see you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so relational. And just hearing you say that, I'm just picturing all this ice just starting to thaw, that bi-directionally you see both people in this dyadic relationship really being relational with each other and really caring and investing in the relationship while being able to be true to who they are and where they are in that particular moment. So yeah, I'm glad we didn't miss that bit. Thanks for bringing us around to that.
Happy to. Awesome. What do you think? Shall we tackle another question?
Okay, so Martha, it's time to hear another question, and I'm actually going to volley this one to you. So therapists want to know, and actually more than one, What do they say to a client who admits, I've been faking orgasm?
Well, this happens. This happens. In my experience, this almost always comes up in an individual session.
Mhm.
And is that your experience?
Oh, yeah.
People don't really want to disclose this to their
Mhm.
partner.
No.
So it's a big deal if
Mhm.
somebody comes to the point of being willing to have this conversation with their partner. So if that's how it presented, I'd be like, woohoo. Like, thank you for the very, very tough disclosure. And now we're in a real conversation.
Right.
So thank you for bringing it. Hard conversations are real, and I'll take the real any day over easy and silent.
But as awesome as that is, not likely.
Not
Not
very
likely.
likely,
Yeah.
not likely. So this typically happens in an individual session. And so I'm always interested to hear it. It tells me something about conflict avoidance. This is the way I conceptualize it. I think that this is a client who has something to say that they're not saying.
So you're taking the sex part of it out of the equation and thinking that they have something to say. And whether it's something to say about orgasm or sex, they have something to say.
Yes. Sort of like the what's the minimum amount of times question, in that I think there's something under this. You don't just fake orgasm in a void out of nowhere.
You don't?
So
Just because it's a Tuesday at 3:02?
that's when we bake it. Yeah, I mean, I am really looking under this for all of the subtext and error messages. Like the ones that come to mind are there's some right amount of time that it should take to reach orgasm. If it takes me longer than that to reach orgasm, there's something wrong with me. I'm probably broken because I take longer or too long. Just the too long with air quotes around it. Like, what the fuck is that?
Oh, that is a whole narrative.
Like,
Yep.
too long for home, So
Mhm.
sorry. My orgasmic reality is inconvenient for you, my love.
Right. There's that sex positivity that we love.
There are some messages there. So we're back to, okay, there's some belief systems, there's some messages, there's orgasm pressure. So I am really excited to tackle this question at the same time as the other one because of that concept of pressure coming up in both. So there's internalized pressure. That would be like what I've learned over the course of my lifetime about how a person with my body parts ought to experience orgasm. And then there's externalized pressure for orgasm, which is whatever my partner or partners might be telling me about what they want regarding my orgasm. So all of that is pressure. And just like you were talking about around the relationship between pressure for sex and desire, what do you think is going to be the effect on orgasm of pressure for orgasm?
Right.
Give it a think, audience. So I know you got that one right.
Right. Not too hard.
Pressure kills stuff.
Yeah.
And when it comes to orgasm, and this is true of desire to some extent too, I think there's a physiologic aspect to it, which has to do with the relationship between anxiety and orgasm, which has to do with the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system and where the arousal nerves lie and blah, blah, blah. But in my concept of it, when I see something in a sexual sequence, a sequence of interactions that are around sex that is anxiety producing, I'm looking for it to impact negatively arousal and orgasm. So we're not going to know what's going to happen here until the anxiety around it goes away. So trying for an orgasm is not a particularly effective way to have an orgasm. And the more wedded you are to getting there, the higher the anxiety gets, the lower the likelihood of the orgasm gets. It's not 100% the picture, but it's a way of conceptualizing this situation that I think will help the therapists who find themselves with this question to begin to untangle what's going on.
I want to jump in here and just get your opinion on what are some of the reasons why you have seen partners believe that they need to have an orgasm. What does it accomplish for the person that they're being sexual with? Have you heard anything like that in the therapy space?
That they need to have an orgasm. You're supposed to have an orgasm. Well, yeah, because we don't have a way of easily saying what we want in the moment that might be a pivot from what's expected. And we have this expectation that there's a sequence that sex has. It starts it progresses. It progresses more. Now the clothes are off. Now it progresses even more. And then how do we know we're done?
Mm,
Well, we have an orgasm,
right.
or our partner has an orgasm and we say we don't want one and they accept that, or someone falls asleep, or we have a really fucking hard conversation
Mm.
that is at an orgasm and my darling, I think I'd like to be done for now.
Why do you think that conversation is so hard? Do you think that goes back to that conflict avoidance?
I think the question that you're asking is more, where did the conflict avoidance get born, which is in our cultural
Mm.
construction of what sex looks like and what's supposed to happen if sex goes right. And so if my partner doesn't have an orgasm, I have to confront something, because the norm is the belief system, the sort of, I'm sure this isn't true everywhere, but the belief system in North America for my culture is mostly the idea that one or some or all have orgasms, and then we know that sex is over. So we also might or might not opt in for continuing sex. It's a decision point. And before we get to that decision point, we have to deal with, wait, what does it mean about me? What does it mean about you? So if my partner doesn't have an orgasm, what does it mean about me?
Right.
I'm a bad lover.
Mhm.
That's probably what it means about me. And what does it mean about my partner? My partner is what? Hard person to have sex with, or broken in some way,
Yeah.
or in some way flawed. And then I also think there's some gender stuff around this that
Oh, yeah.
adds a layer of complexity, because a person with a penis generally reaches orgasm more quickly than a person with a vulva and a clitoris. So, yet most of the research about sex has been done on people with penis. And most of our sort of mythology about how sex is supposed to go is based on those kinds of ideas. And so the idea is it's really easy to reach orgasm, but for a person with a clitoris, it might take a little while.
I might be dating myself, but have you ever heard the first base, second base, third base?
I have.
Yes.
It's been a while.
So I can definitely remember people talking about getting to the different bases. And the expectation was that base number 4, bringing it home, was definitely based on a heterosexual model between in a monogamous situation, and that there would be penetration of a penis into a vagina. And that was fourth base, and fourth base was home. So you start at home and you end at home. So I don't know if they still use that today or not, but that is definitely language that I can remember hearing as early as middle school.
Too.
And it really informed my beliefs for a lot of years.
Right, right. And then there was kind of a little bit of a sexual revolution where it started being like a good lover makes sure that their partner has an orgasm,
Mhm.
which on the surface, like, I don't hate that message.
Right. Nothing to hate there, but we might need to, yeah.
But there's a little problem there because there's also performance pressure.
Right.
If I am expected to give somebody else an orgasm, first of all, ooh, I hate that language. Don't get me going on who gives whom what here. But if I'm supposed to deliver up a certain sexual experience to somebody else,
You're like the DoorDash person for sexual experiences.
oh gosh, yeah. So you can see where I'm going here. I'm just trying to unpack a whole bunch of belief systems. And then I think the other piece is going to be helping this client organize themselves around what's at stake in this conversation for them. What, if it goes well, what would happen? If it goes badly, what would happen? What are they afraid of? What might they hope for? And I'm going to guess that it's never occurred to this person that it could go well.
I would agree.
And yet, I think most people would like to know what feels good and what feels less good in the moment of sex. Most people don't want to receive a grade after sex.
It's really hard to learn what is pleasing to a partner if you're figuring that after sex as well. So there's that feedback loop moment as well. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, totally fair. Totally fair. And so the pivot I'm thinking of here is not to focus on helping this person get ready to have the conversation that they fake orgasm. I'd like to help this person get ready to have the conversation about sexual pleasure in the moment.
I love it.
So what might be fun for me? I was reading a book and I saw this thing and it looked hot. Would you be willing to try it?
I love it.
I think it goes like this. Or would they be willing to take their partner's hand and shift it a little bit, or change the grip, or change the stroke so that it is a little more pleasurable? Like, what are some ways that they could communicate about pleasure in the moment, in real time, rather than giving an assessment after the fact that's going to be very, very difficult to land without increasing anxiety for everybody concerned? How does that feel to you?
Well, what I like about it, and I think we're kind of circling back to some other things that we've talked about, is that you can pay attention internally and create some change, and that it's not all partner dependent. So the partner doesn't have to figure out how to make you have orgasms so that you don't fake it, but you can learn some things. And we're back to that creativity and that empowerment, as well as individuation, where I'm coming back to myself instead of this being totally external. And it's easy to ask people for answers, and it's easy to blame people for answers that we don't have. But getting curious and framing the question in the way that you are, I think really takes us to ground that is fertile.
Which is what we're trying to do here, right?
Yep.
Sort of demystify this material that is 100% sexual. And for a therapist who doesn't understand the physiology of arousal and orgasmic response, what the heck? What do you do? Well, you'll notice you didn't need to know the first thing about the physiology of arousal to work with this client, even though orgasm is a very physiologic phenomenon. It also is influenced by a whole lot of other things, most particularly anxiety and pleasure.
And I think knowing that gets you a lot of the way. It could even get you 75 to 100% of the way, having that understanding. And that's not something that you need to go into from a scientific perspective. Just being able to give that information can be a big game changer for people.
Actually, I would say almost always it'll get you 100% of the way. To decrease anxiety and increase pleasure, you're going to increase orgasmic response.
Even better. So I think we could probably talk about this a lot longer, but maybe we pause and let our friends know that we'll see them the next time. What do you think?
It sounds great. And I got to say, these questions are fun. So I don't know if we'll be able to, I'm sure we will not be able to answer every question, but send them along. Sometimes I blog about stuff that people ask me. There are lots of different ways to get answers for questions like this, but this is very fun.
I second the motion. If you have questions, please don't stop sending them in. We may not be able to get to them, but we might. So give us a shot and we'll see you the next time. Bye now. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you want to hear more about working with me or learn more about working with me, you can do so at www.workwithdrskye.com. I work with clients all over the country and a few abroad to support them in developing healthy sexuality and navigating relational issues, just like you heard today.
And if you're interested in learning more about how to work with sex issues from me, your timing is perfect because my online course, Assessing and Treating Sex Issues in Psychotherapy, is coming right up. And in fact, there's free material about goal setting, including a series of short videos and a free webinar. You'll see me on that webinar, and also Skye is going to come as a guest on that webinar. And you can sign up for that free material at the link in the show notes. And I hope to see you at the webinar, which mark your calendar for Friday, January 23rd at 1 p.m. Central Standard. I'm looking forward to seeing you.